How did you get the idea to write the book, The Water Footprint?
The publisher read a profile of me in the local newspaper in Uxbridge, the Uxbridge Cosmos, and he'd been thinking about a book about water for a while, and then when he realized I'd had some experiences covering water issues around the world, he approached me and said, would you be interested in doing a book on water, and specifically about water footprints? In other words, how much water does it take to make things?
Okay, awesome. And based on your knowledge prior, you just accessed like the knowledge you already knew, or how'd you get all the info to like write the book?
Well, I got a lot of it from universities who've done research into this whole idea of a water concept. In fact, I contacted the guy who invented the term water footprint in the Netherlands. He's a professor there, and he'd done a lot of studies just in the recent years about measuring how much it takes to make a cup of coffee, how much water does it take to make a shirt, how much coffee does it take to make a cell phone. And so he helped me through, look through all of his studies and research. So that was really the primary source of information.
Okay, awesome. And why do you choose to do it in an infographic format?
Well, there's lots and lots of numbers in the book. So there's like, I don't know, 3,000 or 4,000 numbers. So I ended up doing a lot of infographics so they could be visually easy to understand, these big numbers. Mm-hmm. A lot of numbers are really big, thousands and thousands of liters to make a pair of shoes. So we used water bottles and different ways to show how much water it takes, rather than just quoting numbers all the time.
Mm-hmm. Right on, good stuff. So, do you believe water shortages are one of the biggest environmental issues we are facing, and will continue as we use the water supply?
Yeah, water scarcity globally is the biggest threat to peace and security around the world. That's according to a bunch of international bodies, including the UN and the World Economic Forum. They say this is a big threat in present time. So Syria is a good example. The conflict in Syria is largely a result of water shortages. They've been suffering through massive droughts in the last decade, and they've been misusing their water too. So the rich friends of the ruling family have been pumping bazillion gallons of water to feed their commercial crops so they could sell fruits, let's say, to Europe.
Mm-hmm. Okay, for sure, for sure. So when you say it takes 7,600 liters to make a pair of jeans, is this water that we can't get back, or like water that goes into the ocean?
Yeah, so all the numbers in the book, all the water that's talked about in the book is water that's consumed. So this is water that we can't reuse or clean. It can't be used for something else immediately. So all water eventually returns. It's all part of a cycle. It's a closed loop on the earth, so the same amount of water is here as it was 1 million years ago. But the water moves around. So when you grow cotton to make a pair of jeans, most of the water that's used to grow the cotton evaporates. Where does that evaporated water go? It could go anywhere. It could go to the next country. It could go thousands of kilometers to the ocean. So for practical purposes, you can't reuse that water.
Mm-hmm. For sure, for sure. Would the 7,600 liters come from, like, would the rain be included in that, and like the whole process of growing the cotton for the clothing?
Yeah, so it includes the water that's from rain, from pumped from wells. So things like growing cotton usually are done in really dry areas to prevent, the plants grow best in really dry areas, so you got to pump water either from a river or from underground. But yeah, it includes all sources of water.
Okay, for sure, awesome. And how do you think we can begin to fix the problem of water shortages? Like, what can we do as consumers?
Well, one of the things is to be aware that it takes water to do anything. It takes water to generate electricity, it takes water to produce a book, it takes water to have furniture. So that awareness, I think, is the first starting point. The second is to know, to think about, find out where does this thing come from. Is the product you're looking to buy coming from a place that has lots of water, or is it has a little bit of water? So try and get things from places that have lots of water. Buying local is probably the easiest thing you can do because you know what the water resources are, and you're also saving on transport costs, which also is the water, because fuel, gasoline, requires water to make.
For sure, for sure. So, do you think when people talk about environmental issues that fresh water is often overlooked? It's not on the main forefront?
Yeah, in Canada it is, in particular. Other countries, not so much. Countries that have less water, then it's much more of an important issue to them. But here in Canada, we tend to think we have a lot of water, but in fact, we don't really have nearly as much water as we think, because most of our fresh water flows to the Arctic. So it's very difficult for us to actually use it. There's been water shortages in many parts of Canada a year or two ago. British Columbia, which is known as the wet coast, went through a really long period of drought, and they had water restrictions. Same thing with Alberta, Saskatchewan. Those are very dry provinces, and so they're constantly worried about having enough water to produce food or even supply their cities.
Okay, for sure, for sure. What will be the impact if we don't curb our water usage?
We'll have situations more like Syria. So here we have Syrian refugees in Canada, thousands of them. Part of the reason is they didn't take care of their water resources, and they're suffering through a long period of drought. That situation is replicated in Africa right now. There's droughts in various parts of Africa. What are people going to do? If they can't grow their food, they're forced to move. They have to go somewhere. So this is an ongoing problem that's going to continue to worsen, and we're going to have to find ways to deal with the fact that more and more people are going to be forced to move due to drought or flooding, because that can produce the same kind of disaster that forces people to move. So as a country and as an international community, we're going to figure out ways to allow people to move because they have to. They have no other choice. That's one of the consequences. There are other consequences which relate to global food production. Can we continue to produce enough food for ourselves at a time when we're facing extreme droughts and extreme floods? Both of those things destroy food crops and raise prices. So these are some of the things that are starting to happen already that are connected to water. Similarly, energy. So I just came from a World Energy Conference where 1 billion people still don't have access to electricity. Well, electricity requires water. And that can be a huge demand on water resources depending on the form of electricity. However, fortunately, solar and wind, which are easier to put in remote locations, don't require water to generate electricity. But it's, again, a factor in the development of other countries is will they have enough water to generate energy?
For sure. I read that we each consume an average of 8,000 liters of water. In what ways do we consume this water throughout the day, would you say?
It's mostly in our eating, our 3 meals a day. So when we wake up in the morning, have breakfast, we're having eggs and toast. Well, that's a few hundred liters of water there to grow the wheat to produce the bread, and the feed to feed the chicken. So you can see when you think about food, it takes a fair amount of water to grow any kind of crop, but also when you feed a crop to an animal, that ends up sort of multiplying the amount of water used. So for instance, beef hamburger would be 2,600 liters of water for a small one, or medium-sized one. But a soy version of the same thing is 240 liters. And the difference is because it takes a lot of feed to feed a cow to produce the beef. So that's a major part of that 8,000 liter footprint, but also stuff we use each day, our cars, the electricity again for our lights, the clothing that we're wearing, The amount of water we use in our houses, like call it the direct water use, so the water you can see, so when you turn on your tap, that's water you can see, or flush a toilet, that ends up being only about 300 to 400 liters a day per person. So compared to the 8,000, that's the smallest amount of water we actually use.
Okay, awesome. What is the response you get from people when you go out and talk about the fresh water issue?
Well, they're amazed at how much water we use. They're also amazed that it takes water to do anything. So one of the questions I ask kids in schools is, can you think of anything that doesn't need water to make? And so far, 2 years in now, no kid has ever come up with one. I don't think there is anything. So that's one of the things I think people realize, both the size of the amounts of water that are used to make things and the fact that we need water to make anything. So then it comes around to the whole question is, why are we always talking about oil and talking about oil prices when water is far more useful and more important than oil?
And are we more likely to run out of water or oil first, would you say?
It depends on where you are. It's all very local,
Okay,
right?
true.
Yeah.
Is the rainwater, actually I think we went over that, sorry. How much water do we not get back in the figures if rainwater is included?
How do you mean?
Like the rainwater that's like included in the statistics, I'm assuming it eventually like goes back into like the sky and stuff. So how much would you say we're getting like any of this water back eventually, or like how much of it would you say we eventually?
It depends on where you are. So for instance, if you're in a dry country and the rain falls on the crop, let's say it's wheat, most of the water evaporates. So 80, 90% of the water actually evaporates. Similarly, if you're pumping water from underground and you're using irrigation, so spray irrigation, 80, 90% of the water is lost to evaporation. So that goes up in the atmosphere, goes back into the water cycle. The rest of the water goes into the soil. And a tiny percentage actually is in the plant itself. So the water in the soil will stay in the soil for a little while, but once the crop is harvested, it'll also evaporate too. Some of the water will go, down into groundwater, become a part of the groundwater. So all of that water eventually gets back into the global water cycle. So it's never lost. So we've kept, as I say, the same amount of water on the planet for the last several million years.
But it just depends where it goes. Some of it's going into like the ocean and other places.
Yeah.
We don't have the technology to filter ocean water yet.
We do have a technology called desalination to filter ocean water. And it's being done in the Middle East. California does it, Australia does it. Very dry places that don't have good water resources have to rely on it. It's extremely expensive, and it produces a brine, which is a very super salty, sometimes toxic waste product that they have to deal with. I recently wrote an article for The Guardian about what's happening in the Gulf of Arabia, where so many desalination plants from Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, all the countries along there, they're ending up making that water, that ocean water, more salty because of the desalination. Getting rid of some of the wastes into the Gulf is actually making it more salty. Harder for fish and other species to survive, also making desalination even more expensive because it's becoming harder and harder to get the salt out.
So it's definitely not really a sustainable way of getting clean water.
Not sustainable because it's huge energy usage. Although Saudi Arabia is trying to, I think they might have built the very first solar panel powered desalination station. It's quite expensive right now to do something like that. Don't know if it's going to work, but yeah, it's very energy intensive.
For sure, for sure. Do you believe that many people kind of treat water as an invaluable resource and it's contributing to the problem of water shortages and whatnot?
Most people don't think much about water, again, in Canada. Other parts of the world, they do think a lot more about it. Yeah, we take it for granted, mostly here in Canada. We always assume you turn on the tap, you're going to get water. If you shut off, if the water was shut off, let's say, for 24 hours, then people would have a very different perspective about water. Same thing when you're camping. You go camping, you got to lug your water around with you. You have a greater appreciation of how much water we use for washing and cooking and drinking, and how heavy water is. You know, a liter is a kilogram. 8,000 liters a day is 8,000 kilograms. That's the weight of several cars. Would we want to haul that much water from a well every day? Well, we actually couldn't do it physically. So there's an underappreciation for the value of water and its usefulness.
For sure, and the amount that we consume, I don't think a lot of people recognize that it's that much.
No, no, that's right.
So through education, you think we can lessen this issue?
Yeah, I think we can do everything we're doing right now with a lot less water, but it starts with awareness and educating ourselves about how much is being used. Can we do it in a better, more efficient way? A lot of places are starting to do that. Breweries, actually, of all people, are using a lot less water than they did 10 years ago for the same reasons. Some bottling companies also have a strong program on reducing their own water footprints. So some industries are doing that. Other places, of course, have to do it out of necessity because they just don't have the water resources in the first place.
For sure, for sure. Is there anything you'd like to add about the issue?
I think one of the things that needs to shift as well as education is, you know, giving water some due respect. It's so important to our own personal survival. You know, we can't get by without at least a liter or two of water a day. We won't survive. But also the fact that our entire way of life is built on water. It's not built on oil. It's water that makes all the things we have around us possible. So I think it's due some respect.
For sure, for sure. And how can people get your book if they wanted to?
It's available in local bookstores. It's available online as well. Here in Port, I think EcoPort has copies of it.
Okay.
Last time I checked.
Right on.
Yeah, it's definitely available. It won the award for the best science book in Canada.
Yeah, I noticed it won a bunch of awards, which is pretty good
so
stuff.
It's been very
Congratulations.
satisfying. Yeah. Thanks.
Have you talked? I noticed you said you used to give talks at schools and stuff. Do you still do that?
Yeah, I've done a few just in the last couple of weeks at the University of Ottawa, and you know, public schools, grade schools, even down to I once did a talk for grade 1 and 2.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, the infographics make it easy, and water. Everybody knows about water and familiar with water, and there's ways to do this sort of show and tell to help kids understand how important water is.